If it is that our society is made up of cults that we may not recognize, let us look at the foundation or roots of our society, that being schooling or education, and you likely want to hear about this man who has written several books on this matter in great detail, someone who has direct experience, who has quite a story to share.
John Taylor Gatto is a former New York City Teacher of the Year and New York State Teacher of the Year.
He was a 30-year public school teacher in New York in the 70s and 80s. But he was a very reform-minded teacher. He hated the top-down control and conformity. He was always trying to encourage his kids, like, what do you want to learn? And let's help you. And let's get out of the classroom and, go see the world on a, field trip and just experience life. And he got so frustrated after 30 years that he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled, "I Quit, I Think." In his own words, he said, "I'm hurting kids more than I'm helping them," because he was doing it within a system that required them to get permission to go pee.
He has a new piece in this month's Harper's, Against School, How Public Education Cripples Our Kids and Why. Mr. Gatto, what's your basic theme here?
Well, my basic theme, I suppose, would be that schools are dangerous places for kids. They retard intellectual development. They retard moral development. They bankrupt communities financially by bleeding hundreds of billions of dollars into unproductive activity, and they bleed communities dynamically by taking the energies of children away from the general society and dissipating them. They're places of intimidation, bullying, sexual harassment, criminality, and even arson and murder. And the epidemic of national obesity can be traced, I think, to the training ground of the school cafeteria.
Schooling is a form of adoption. You give your kid away at his most, or his or her most plastic years, to a group of strangers. You accept a promise, sometimes stated and more often implied, that the state, to its agents, knows better how to raise your children and educate them than you, your neighbors, your grandparents, your local traditions do. And that your kid will be better off so adopted. By the time the child returns to the family or has the option of doing that, very few want to. Their parents are some form of friendly stranger too, and why not? In the key hours of growing up, strangers have reared the kid. Now let's look at the strangers, of which you were one and I was one. Regardless of our good feeling toward children, regardless of our individual talents or intelligence, we have so little time each day with each of these kids, we can't possibly know enough vital information about that particular kid to tailor a set of exercises to that kid. Oh, some of us, will try more than others, but there simply isn't any time to do it to a significant degree. So what we do is accept, and of course if we don't accept this, we're fired or harassed. We accept a state's prescription that's written in manuals. You do this first, and this second, and this third, and here you have a little latitude to talk to the kids. And the way the state checks on whether you've followed that diet is there's standardized tests given at intervals. If your kids do badly, it does not mean that they're bad readers or anything else. It means that they haven't been obedient to the drills the state set down, and they're marked for further treatment later on, or they're marked to be excluded from responsible jobs. Perhaps some ways by being excluded from the colleges that lead to responsible jobs, in other ways from the licenses that lead to responsible jobs. This was all worked out. It didn't evolve by a lot of rational people saying, we'll take this, this, and this from the past, then the next generation will take this, this, and this. This was set down largely in a handful of places. Prussia was perhaps the most prominent of those places. And the Prussian experiment leaped into the United States almost immediately in the 1840s. Leaped into the United States. Its propagandists covered the country here. Its backers, its financial backers, set up the most important teacher training institutes and financed those institutes. And then no one was allowed to become a teacher who didn't more or less subscribe to the fact that experts could create a curriculum and pedagogues could administer it. But the people who gave us schooling weren't these wealthy people. They were utopian thinkers who believed the family and tradition were the greatest obstacles to making a perfect society, a utopia. Rockefeller and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan, solving the problem of production with high-speed machinery, they saw that material abundance could be created and that want, first of all, of course, they thought they could become supremely wealthy, which they did. But secondarily, they weren't beasts. They thought that this material abundance, since they had abandoned a belief in a creator or an afterlife, this material abundance was the best that a human life could aim for. And to do that, the family had to be moved off center stage, and the children had to be processed like raw materials. These are the people who saw to it with their influence that when legislation that was wildly radical based on any past model was proposed, that the right legislators would vote that legislation through. They saw to it that money was available to build these vast piles of brick and stone and to drain children out of the community by the force of law, mind you. If you gave children and families options, it probably would take half a decade before many people tried the options, but I think inside of a decade the institutional schools would vanish because they don't teach the way children learn, nor can they teach the way children learn. That's not what they're set up to do. They're set up to produce a predictable, homogeneous, safe product. They're set up to sort people into occupational categories, roughly consonant with what the current economy demands. Strings that hold us like puppets are really inventions of our own mind. I'm not saying that there aren't armies and police and various ways to punish deviance, but there isn't any way to punish a large number of deviants. There isn't any way to do that. It's too expensive to even try to do it unless you can colonize the minds of children growing up so they become their own police. And they will report other children who are deviating.
Is there an idea more radical in the history of the human race than turning your children over to total strangers who you know nothing about and having those strangers work on your child's mind out of your sight for a period of 12 years? Could there be a more radical idea than that? The more you intrude in a kid's life, the more you say this is what you need to know to pass the SATs, the more wrecked the kid becomes, the more irrelevant this thing called education is, because there is no correlation, none at all, between school grades or SAT tests and anything in future life. In fact, in many instances, there are negative correlations. The better you do in this area, the worse you will do.
Theorists from Plato to Rousseau to Frederick of Prussia knew and taught explicitly that if children could be kept childish beyond its term in nature, if they could be cloistered in a society of children without any real responsibility except obedience, if their inner lives could be attenuated by removing the insights of history, literature, philosophy, economics, religion, if the imminence of death and the certainty of pain and loss can be removed from daily consciousness, if the profound reflections on one's own death could be replaced with the trivializing emotions of greed, envy, jealousy, and fear, young people would grow older, but they would never grow up, and a great enduring problem of supervision would be solved. For who can argue against the truth that childish and childlike people are far easier to manage than critically trained, self-reliant ones? The 6 purposes of modern schooling, taken directly from Dr. Inglis's book. The first function of schooling is adjustive. Schools are to establish fixed habits of reaction to authority. Second is the diagnostic function. School is to determine each student's proper social role, logging the evidence mathematically and anecdotally on cumulative records. Next comes the sorting function. School sorts children by training individuals only so far as their likely destination in the social machine, not one step beyond. The fourth function is conformity. As much as possible, kids are to be made alike. This is not done from any passion for egalitarian ideals, but so that their future behavior will be mathematically predictable in service to market research and government research. Next comes the hygienic function, that school is expected to accelerate natural selection by tagging the unfit so clearly. That's what all those little humiliations from first grade on, that's what all the posted list of ranked grades are about, so clearly that the unfit will drop from the reproduction sweepstakes, either in despair or because their likely mates will have accepted the school's judgment of them as terminally inferior. Last comes a fancy Latin word, the propaedeutic function. A small fraction of lucky kids will quietly be taught how to take over management of this continuing project.
It's a cult. It's a secular religion.
So there you have it. Take of it what you will. I have this footage to speak for itself. Now, in Gatto's book, Dumbing Us Down, he says what schools does to children in 7 points. It makes them indifferent, it makes them emotionally dependent, it makes them intellectually dependent, it teaches them a kind of self-confidence that requires constant confirmation by experts, it makes it clear to them that they cannot hide because they are always supervised, it teaches them to accept their class affiliation, and it confuses the students. It provides an incoherent ensemble of information that the child needs to memorize to stay in school. Apart from the tests and trials, the programming is similar to the television. It fills almost all the free time of children. One sees and hears something only to forget it again. And I find it interesting that many billionaires or people who we consider influential or successful in our world actually say that no, they didn't go to school, or they're not paying taxes, they're not doing the things that maybe a lot of people think they should do.
Do you think Bezos became a billionaire paying taxes?
I wouldn't bet on that.
He doesn't pay taxes. Trump doesn't pay taxes. I don't pay taxes. So the question is, how do guys like us do it, is the question you should be asking. We study different things. I wouldn't go to school.
There's no need even to have a college degree at all, or even high school. Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, Steve Jobs, these guys didn't graduate from college. But if you had a chance to hire them, of course, that would be a good idea.
There's even an old video by Mr. Beast, somebody who's known as the world's biggest YouTuber, a massive influencer, someone who is considered successful.
School is a waste of time. We spend the first 18 years of our life sitting at a desk learning pointless information, 99% of which we're never gonna use in life. Maybe I just have senioritis, but literally everything I'm learning right now feels like a bunch of useless information. The questions I'm getting in math are like, you have 2 green apples and a red apple, now calculate the mass of the sun. Like, they don't even make sense anymore to me, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I kid you not, I had a question on a history test that was, what is Napoleon Bonaparte's wife's name? Because, you know, knowing his wife's name is so important to my life. It is stupid. Like, how is knowing his wife's name ever going to help my life? Well, why? Why is that necessary? And I've had so many questions like that in the past. It's just like, why do I need to know this? Like, how is this ever going to help me in life? No, I might be a little bit biased in my opinion because I really do hate learning. I've never enjoyed learning. I've always felt like this. I've always felt like it's pointless and useless 99% of what we learn. So maybe I'm just a little bit biased, and maybe everyone else doesn't feel this way, but I really don't understand why we learn some of the things we learn in school. It just doesn't make sense to me.
And here are other testimonies that I think are quite revealing.
I mean, I suppose when you look back at it, it's quite culty, but we all did that. All the British school kids sat cross-legged on the floor, belting out some hymns in the morning. If you were really responsible, you got to use the overhead projector. There was one at the front of the hall, and there was like those see-through transparent sheets that someone would be there to take things off and put them back on. It was a huge position of responsibility, being the person who ran the overhead projector. And my God, if you put that sheet on upside down, everyone would laugh at you. Everyone. And I went to a relatively kind of small primary school in the middle of the countryside. So the teachers would walk out and they would go, "Good morning, students," and you would all go, "Good morning, Mr. And you had to be the one that just kept that syllable going for the end. If they ever said yes in a school assembly, it was always yes. You were king. And then if there was ever a round of applause, there'd always be the round of applause would stop, and then you got the last clap in. And if you were in year 6, you got to sit on the wooden benches at the back of the hall.
I have no clue about what I want to do with my life. I have no interest because I saw every subject as a study, as work, and I excelled at every subject just for the purpose of excelling and not learning. And quite frankly, I'm very scared. John Taylor Gatto, a retired school teacher and activist critical of compulsory schooling, asserts, "We could encourage the best qualities of youthfulness, curiosity, adventure, resilience, the capacity for surprising insight simply by being more flexible about time, texts, and tests, by introducing kids into truly competent adults, and by giving each student what autonomy he or she needs in order to take a risk every now and then. But we don't do that. Between these cinder block walls, we are all expected to be the same. We are trained to ace every standardized test, and those who deviate and see light through a different lens are worthless to the scheme of public education, and therefore viewed with contempt." H.L. Mencken wrote in the American Mercury for April 1924 that the aim of public education is not to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is the aim in the United States. To illustrate this idea, doesn't it perturb you to learn about the idea of critical thinking? Is there really such a thing as uncritically thinking? To think is to process information in order to form an opinion. But if we are not critical when processing this information, are we really thinking? Or are we mindlessly accepting other opinions as truth? I must retrain myself and constantly remember how insane this ostensibly sane place really is. And now here I am in a world guided by fear, a world suppressing the uniqueness that lies inside each of us, a world where we can either acquiesce to the inhuman nonsense of corporatism and materialism or insist on change. We are not enlivened by an educational system that clandestinely sets us up for jobs that could be automated, for work that need not be done, for enslavement without fervency for meaningful achievement. We have no choices in life when money is our motivational force. Our motivational force ought to be passion, but this is lost from the moment we step into a system that trains us rather than inspires us. We are more than robotic bookshelves, conditioned to blurt out facts we were taught in school. We are all very special. Every human on this planet is very special. So aren't we all deserving of something better? Of using our minds for innovation rather than memorization, for creativity rather than futile activity, for rumination rather than stagnation? We are not here to get a degree to then get a job so we can consume industry-approved placation after placation. There is more and more still. The saddest part is that the majority of students don't have the opportunity to reflect as I did. The majority of students are put through the same brainwashing techniques in order to create a complacent labor force working in the interests of large corporations and secretive government. And worst of all, they are completely unaware of it. I will never be able to turn back these 18 years. I can't run away to another country with a different education system, perhaps meant to enlighten rather than condition. This part of my life is over, and I want to make sure that no other child will have his or her potential suppressed by powers meant to exploit and control.
And just like the fringe cults, there are many people who speak up about this. And is it a cult? It seems like there's a lot of elements that line up. But what you could also look at is the teachers who are kicked from their positions.
Fired from my full-time teaching position. Really no conversation, so they clearly knew what they wanted to do. My basic observations, my life experience, there's no NDA. So when you say, we appreciate you not divulging, I don't know if that means that you're threatening my severance package. I really hope not. It was a bummer to lose my computer. If you disagree with me voicing opinions on YouTube or feeling like it's easier just to get rid of that. I understand. To get rid of a teacher like that. And I accept that. Sometimes how you do it, though, is important. And I think this could have been done without just taking my computer and losing a book that I've been writing for 2 years, multiple things I've been writing for 2 years, all the data from 2 years, my digital life. Just, I hope I never see you again, and I just want to live my life. I really am not interested in you guys. Good luck to you. I have devoted 4 years of my life. Yesterday, it was like being a character in a video game and just being deleted. And the rest, it's like you were never there. It was remarkable by people that love to pretend that you're your teammates, and not once did I ever cross any of the parameters that you laid out, that your lawyers laid out. And I even praised you for and thanked you for making that so clear, objectively recognizing what the rules were. There was no rules broken. You even said congratulations. And it's hard when you do it alone and you don't have, I can't think of a single time in the last 4 months that a single colleague, leadership, any of the principals, any of these people have ever, how's the YouTube channel going? How are you doing? Is there any clarity we can offer? You just reference another 5-minute meeting 4 months ago in a 1-sentence email from 4 months ago when I was in the middle of this storm trying to navigate all this. It can be challenging navigating all this on your own. And best damn believe I've been doing my best. So any perceived wrong that you may have, it was not intentional. I have done my best.
So in case you don't know the story with Warren Smith, he put out a video on YouTube and Elon Musk shared it and it went viral. And it's a simple video where he was just asking questions to his student. It was just about critical thinking. Now notice the comments defending him. Unfortunately, social media is telling people what to think instead of how to think. This is the kind of teacher we need, one that calmly and respectfully demonstrates how to think critically. I am just going off on what a lot of people have said. They're referring to the student and how they're just being obedient and the teacher is helping them get out of that obedience. Another comment says, I am so happy to see a real teacher, not an influencer, not a propagandist, a teacher to teaches people to think. Thank you. Full applause to the student who eventually realized, I feel like an idiot now. Excellent teaching method. So the opposite of what John Taylor Gatto was saying the school system is built upon. So no wonder why he got fired. But again, in case we think that's a coincidence, well, what about other teachers? Are they getting fired? Well, I actually interviewed one that had a similar experience.
Because I really do believe, Corey, that no children should be in government schools until they're reformed, until there is major reform. And we've been pushing for it. Teachers have been pushing for it for years, for decades. And we keep getting stopped by the administration. And why is that? I mean, we go into a whole discussion. Why is the administration stopping reform? Because they want efficiency and they get paid for every little bottom that's in every little seat. I teach kids how to talk to cops. I got in trouble one day for that in middle school. I was subbing, but I was just passing the time and telling them to be polite. I did get in trouble with my particular district for telling the children the truth about a particular political figure. They kept asking me, I was subbing at the time, and I got into trouble with that. And I went into what's called a Loudermill meeting where I was, told not to do this anymore. And, but I said I was just telling the truth, and they didn't like that at all. And so I had 2 of those, and then I just resigned because the Loudermill kind of says, you better shape up or we're going to fire you. You don't want that. You want to resign. Absolute insanity is happening. And if you don't see it, I'm so sorry, but your child will be impacted and possibly emotionally traumatized. And I know it will be bad for them. So I think all parents should pull their children and then give the government schools a lesson that we're not interested in your baloney anymore.
You may be skeptical, and I'm glad that you're able to critically think. But I think the question is, if we are able to critically think, and especially in our younger years where our mind is developing, are we allowed to critically think? Because if we aren't allowed then, will we then later? There's a great video that I want to share with you that I think covers a lot of this.
For millennia, slavery was assumed to be natural and proper, physical abuse of women was socially accepted, and it was expected for churches to use torture and violence to spread their beliefs. Thankfully, in much of the world, oppression based on race, religion, or gender has decreased dramatically. But there is still one group of people that is subjected to oppression with the approval of the majority, namely children. In the name of compulsory education, a young child is taken away from his family and friends and put in an institution, in many cases a government-run institution, where he is under the constant surveillance and control of authority figures who are often complete strangers. The child is forced to give up his freedom and privacy and give up control of his own time and energy. While being assimilated into a strictly scheduled and regimented program, the child quickly learns that there are two distinct classes of people, controllers and subjects, and that he is a subject. He learns that his worth and his goodness are measured and graded primarily by how well he follows orders. He learns that he must go where he is told to go and do what he is told to do, and that it is never his place to challenge or question the rules imposed upon him. He is put into a group, often a group of strangers, and forced to conform with the crowd in word and deed. Where the group goes, what the group does, and even what the group thinks about, is decided by the controllers. Individual thought is replaced by groupthink. Self-determination is replaced by collective action. Not collective action resulting from individuals voluntarily choosing to work together for some common goal, but collective action resulting from an authoritarian institution forcing its agenda onto subjects who have no choice in the matter. But consider how you would feel if the powers that be treated you the way many millions of children are treated every day. You are required to surrender yourself into the custody of an institution without trial or even the accusation that you did anything wrong. While in school, you can be punished without proof that you did anything wrong, and whole groups can be punished for what one individual has done. The institution decides who you may and who you must associate with, segregating its subjects by age and sometimes by gender and or academic performance. If you do not do the work assigned to you, you are punished. You may speak only when the controllers say so, and only about what they tell you to speak about. You may be punished for criticizing the controllers. If you are questioned, you may be punished if you do not answer. Your person and belongings may be subjected to arbitrary searches. Consider a few of the ways in which school resembles prison. In the name of law, you are confined to a building for a period of time, along with many other inmates. Whether it's called a prison count or taking attendance, you are regularly counted to make sure no inmate is missing. If one is, government agents may try to find the escapee and bring him in. Even on the inside, where you can be and when, is strictly regimented. Loud bells tell you when you must move to somewhere else. For a little time each day, you're allowed to go out to the prison yard for recess. But of course, you're still not allowed to leave the grounds. If you misbehave, you will be put in special housing or detention. And inmates often spend time watching the clock, eagerly awaiting the time when they are set free. Being stuck in such conditions, day after day, with no means of escape, often leads to frustration, depression, even violence. In this setting, where many strangers are forced to be together for a prolonged period of time, it is natural for bullying to occur, and for cliques or gangs to form, as those being held captive look for any way to feel powerful in a situation where they know that their lives are not their own. Every day, millions of American school children who are too young to even understand the words they are saying are required to robotically swear undying allegiance to an authoritarian government and the symbol which represents it. For a little perspective, imagine the same exact scenario, but with the youth being forced to swear allegiance to a different flag and a different republic. Any child who refuses to say the pledge will likely be subjected to ridicule and punishment by his fellow students and by the authority figures. Americans may be quick to recognize the mind control tactics which foreign regimes have used to train their youth to feel love and loyalty to their rulers, but may be reluctant to recognize that many of the same repetitive rituals, the same methods of indoctrination and behavioral training, are still being used in America today under the guise of education. However kind and well-intentioned teachers are today, and however gentle and pleasant the control has become, the system still teaches human beings to be compliant, docile, easily controlled subjects who will conform to whatever agenda those in power oppose upon them. Over time, students may forget most of their academic lessons, language, mathematics, history, and so on, but most of them will, for the rest of their lives, remain experts at blindly obeying authority. Fortunately, there are many individuals and organizations now moving away from traditional authoritarian indoctrination, such as the Waldorf model of schooling, much of the growing homeschooling movement, and the ultimate departure from authoritarian indoctrination known as unschooling. Are we raising a society of people who will not only tolerate oppression, but will themselves inflict oppression on others if and when a perceived authority tells them to? Right now, the answer to that question is yes, we are. For that answer to change, parents need to start rethinking what is familiar and traditional when it comes to child rearing and education.
So, okay, let's say the school system is a cult and maybe we should escape it. Perhaps it even is related to bullying, which is ironically enough taught in schools, but yet we maybe aren't seeing that it's happening to ourselves in the bigger picture. One thing we should probably think about is, well, what is the solution? What is the alternative to school? And she mentions unschooling or homeschooling. Well, check this out.
So while kids everywhere are studying history
in the summer of 1765
and geography,
Bering Strait,
the Martin kids are free to pursue their own intellectual curiosity. Devon's baking projects involve measurements and creativity.
About 8 to 6 cups of flour.
I just personally don't believe in that humans learn best when they're trying to learn something that somebody else is telling them to.
How do you see your kids' future lives playing out? High school, college age, beyond?
I don't really necessarily project. I just want them to be happy.
But I'm stunned that you've never thought about what kind of jobs your kids would end up.
Well, I don't know. Does anybody know? Do you know? Can you picture what kind of jobs your kids would have?
My son wants to be the Yankee third baseman, so right now it's a little off.
Perhaps not the best long-term plan.
Most of the struggle is myself and trying to figure out how to let go of what my idea of school is. What if they really do need algebra and I don't teach them algebra?
So the fears that you have are so normal.
Okay.
And algebra is not something everybody on earth needs to know.
So there's dependency, preparation, and then performance. Are they going to be prepared to compete with those who have dealt with that all of their growing up life when your children have not?
Well, we believe our children, they're in the real world by being homeschoolers or being educated at home. We're in the real world every day. It's kids in school that are in a building all day, kind of away from the real world.
But your kids don't work against deadlines.
They have their own deadlines. They set their own goals. They do.
But the world doesn't do that. They don't hire you and say, okay, just do your best and check in at the end of the day. That's not the way it works. And you say your children are going to grow up and be entrepreneurs, but they may not.
They can do whatever they want, whatever their choices, whatever their goals are in life, we're there to facilitate that.
The world doesn't do that. Well, that's interesting. Just because the world doesn't do it doesn't mean that it isn't right. See, it's very interesting the justifications or the excuses that we make for ourselves upon different ideas that maybe are just contrary to popular opinion or what everybody else is doing. See, people may look at something like this and say it's a cult, but there's no coercion involved. In fact, there's no single way to do unschooling or homeschooling. I think all these moms and all these teachers want is merely a world without coercion, a choice for their students, a choice for their kids to learn what they want to learn, for them to be happy and not to be stuck in some prison-looking building with compulsory schooling. It's perfect that if the school system functions as a cult, that you would have people reinforcing that cult to maintain that cult, just as you do with any other fringe cult. And so look at some of the comments here to this news report. I know this family, and this is nothing at all what is portrayed here. She is one of the most amazing mothers I have ever met. Okay, that's positive. But look at these other comments. These kids will be on government welfare program when they grow up. 8 to 6 cups of flour, nitpicking about what some kid says. Wow, first world problems. On other continents like Asia and Africa, for example, kids and adults consider themselves lucky and special if they can attend school or college. Well, again, now they're grasping for comparison. They have to use that as an argument, but not looking at the very fact of the matter. Is there coercion? No. That's quite an improvement if we're trying to move in the right direction away from cult behavior. And since this is a direct rebellion against the experts and the systems, People may think, well, is there any sort of scientific or real basis to this? Is someone really going to learn what they may need to learn to become a rocket scientist, for instance, when perhaps they absolutely can? There's many different psychologists and researchers who have talked about this. You just probably won't likely hear them in school. Go figures.
Would learn to read and write anyway because they're so exposed to the code by age 9 or 10 if no effort whatever were made to teach them to read and write, just as they learn to speak with no effort being made to teach them to speak except to talk to them, namely to expose them to the code. On the other hand, if you try to teach them to read, you would have the same effect as if you try to teach them to speak, namely about 30% would stammer and stutter. There's no question of that. The theory of a social engineer always says that you can analyze everything down into its least elements, and you first learn 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you add them up to 2, 4, 6, 8. But this isn't at all how a person learns, because the person learns by an intrinsic need or reaching out. And what you reach out to is what's interesting. And if the text isn't interesting, then why bother?
Why do you go on to make the inference that the entire public school system ought to be abolished?
Because if we have a system which is run centrally, where we have 1 million children, let's say in New York City, 50,000 teachers, and 1 million children, it will always be run as social engineering.
That was Paul Goodman, and he studied a lot of psychology and did a lot of works on this topic, including so many other people, by the way: Herbert Spencer, William Godwin, Noam Chomsky, Josiah Warren, Ivan Illich, John Holt, just for some names. Even Einstein in his younger years was quite rebellious, and he did not get along with teachers, but now we consider him to be super intelligent and super successful. It's worth mentioning that some people may confuse the scientist with the science, when in reality the scientist is just working through the science, but the science is much larger than the scientist. So when people look towards science, they may just look toward the scientist and their own perspective, not realizing that science is a massive field that consists of many scientists, and science itself is worth questioning. I don't think our learning ever stops. In fact, Socrates says, "All that I know is that I know nothing," and that knowing our ignorance is how we come to actually know. It's also worth questioning if some of the fields of science and education is even worth learning in the first place. Like, why are we learning it? Maybe it's just a societal expectation or need, but underneath, maybe it's not even required at all, and maybe we need to learn something much more grand and profound. And using this video as an example, people may not learn about cults, but they may learn about maybe how to help somebody with a certain medication. And although that one thing might be helpful, we might say it's necessary, if we understand the nature of cults, then we would say, okay, maybe this person won't feel like they need this medication, or that it's the only thing that they can use to help them, or that everybody else is telling them to take it. There are so many curriculums out there, and there's ones that have even been taken out of the school system. I mean, this is a book called Trivium. It's known as the Classical Liberal Arts of Grammar, Logic, and Rhetoric, and not many people have heard of this, for instance. But there are charts upon charts of things that we do not learn about in school. I'll share with you some important things you probably should know. One of the founders of the Prussian schooling model was Johann Fichte, who was an influential philosopher who created this system that was eventually imported into the US by the politician Horace Mann in 1852. And he said education should aim at destroying free will, and that every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects. People will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished it. He calls this some sort of technique where they won't need to use armies or policemen or violence, and that people will sort of mind control themselves in a sense. We see a similar quote with Reverend Frederick T. Gates in 1913, a business advisor to John D. Rockefeller, who created the General Education Board. He said, "We shall not try to make these people or any of these children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise them up among authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the humbler ambition to raise up from among them lawyers, doctors, preachers, statesmen, of whom we now have ample supply. We even see Benjamin Rush, who was a U.S. founding father and known as the father of American psychiatry, writing Education Proper in a Republic in 1786, saying, "Let him be taught the same time that he must forsake and even forget his own family when the welfare of his country requires it. Let the authority of our masters be as absolute as possible. Subordination of laws convert men into republican machines. Have this sort of system that takes the child as soon as he can speak, checks his natural independence and passions, makes him subordinate to superior age, to the laws of the state, to town and parochial institutions." These are direct quotes. Even studying psychotherapists like Daniel Rhodes says that this is the predominant institution, the school system, and he says the main purpose of these institutions are to institutionalize people. And the model that is employed is the panopticon model. And this is related to other people and their works like Michael Foucault, who says reductionist scientific model that we have been looking at through the system of the panopticon also removes from us the natural world. As noted with the ideas of Descartes, views the natural world as either non-existent or dead, and we have to get rid of our individual self either by submission to new forms of authority or by compulsive conforming to accepted patterns. Another quote, "The ultimate purpose of institutions, beginning with schools, is to develop an idea that Noam Chomsky calls manufacturing consent, and this manufacturing consent becomes a process of indoctrination that seems to be in the best interest of the citizens, and an indoctrination that is acceptable, and that this must be scientific and objective, removing passion or feelings." Ivan Illich also talked about this, how schools often damage students socially and psychologically by fostering a sense of inadequacy and dependence on formal education, and to have an emphasis on industrial tools that create dependency and limit individual freedom, reflecting authoritarian control. Relate this to psychiatry. Many kids in our school system may even be on medications, and you have Dr. Peter Breggin talking about how there's this contemporary widespread diagnosing of children. It's a subtler form of social control that suppresses children rather than providing them with what they need to fulfill their basic needs in the home, school, and family. Instead of reforming our education system and improving family life, we drug our children into more docile states. So he's saying it's happening on the medical individual level as well. I understand this may be a lot to unpack, but this is the root to our society. And if this is the cult that everybody begins their life into, and it's unquestioned, especially by cult experts out there in the world, then perhaps it makes you so much more vulnerable, much more likely to fall into other cults as you get older, without you even realizing it, because that's the nature of a great deceptive cult.